Because I know everybody's busy. Matt's not here today, and he usually does my little intro thing. So I'll introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, hi. Oh, there, Matt. You have a mask on, Matt. Do you want to say hi? I heard you weren't here today. No? Okay. So I'm Janis Benstock, and I am going to talk to you today about ways to make your buyer's offer stronger in a seller's market. So I'm a broker at Settle Down Philadelphia. I'm on the board of directors at GPAR. I teach at Temple. Do I sound impressive? I teach the pre-licensure courses, all that's impressive stuff, but I'm not your broker unless I am, and I'm not an attorney. So make sure that everything I tell you, you clear with your broker and or legal, because I'm not an attorney. That's my disclaimer. And we all should always use that disclaimer all the time. So we all know that today, right now, it's still most places a crazy seller's market. And if you're representing a buyer, it's really hard oftentimes to get your, wait a second, I am not able to share my screen. So I can't share my screen. And I need to. So if you, can someone help me, Donna or somebody? So if you're trying to represent, I'll go without the slides until I can get my screen shared. So if you're representing a buyer and you're having a hard time getting your offer through, we know that in addition to price, like if they're locked into price and they can't go higher and you're in a bidding war, what are you going to do? So I came up with a bunch of ways, and some of them you may know, and some of them may be news to you. And I'm just going to start talking about them without the slideshow so that we can move on. And if we get the slideshow, then I'll bring up the slides. But one of my favorite sayings that I use all the time is your offer is only as strong as your weakest contingency. And what I mean by that is if your offer is full price or over asking and it's cash, but it has some weird contingency, like you have to sell another home in Arizona, or I heard somebody in a Facebook group say the buyer put in an offer contingent upon who won the election, which I would run like hell from. But if it was some sort of weird contingency like that, that weakened your offer to the point that no matter how strong your offer is, it's not going to fly unless we meet that contingency. So you have to look at every single box, every line, every contingency in your offer and look at it as a whole. It's greater than the sum of its parts. It's not just about price. It's not just about settlement date. So, oh, I think I can share my screen now. Here we go. Share. Okay. So here we go. My computer's acting really, what? Does everybody see that? What the heck?
That we see.
Hold on, let me see.
Wow. It's like someone slipped.
You're making art.
Coffee. Huh?
They said you're making art.
I've never seen anything like this before. I think I'm gonna. What?
I said it looks decorative. Hold on, let me see.
Wow, I'm gonna take a picture of this.
Is your enter button stuck?
No, nothing's on my. I think I'm gonna log out and log back in because I think I'm in here twice, and that has something to do. I'm in the vortex. So hang on, I'm gonna literally log out and literally log right back in. Oh, I think, am I still in the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. I got out the one
You're
person.
here.
I was in twice. That's what the problem was. Okay. So now let me see if I can share my screen. I got rid of the vortex. All right. Let's try this one more time. Share. And hopefully that won't happen again. And perfect. Okay. Now here we go. Now, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Can you? Awesome. Okay, here we go. So you already know who I am. I'm Janis. You already know what we're talking about. And here's my little bio about me empowering agents to become wealthy in real estate. And I do it by creating an authentic life in business without having to rely on cold calls or scripts. But that's not what we're talking about today. I already said your offer is only as strong as your weakest contingency. Now let's get into ways that you can actually make your offer stronger. So the first one is the earnest money deposit. And we all understand about earnest money deposit, but let's just talk about it for a little bit. And we're informal here. So if you have questions or stuff that you want to jump in, just jump in and say this, because we're a small group, we can do that. So we all know that earnest money deposit is the amount that your buyer stands to lose if they breach. And if they don't breach, no harm, no foul, they get the money back no matter how much they put up. So what some newer agents don't really wrap their brain around is that earnest money and deposit or down payment are completely separate, meaning that your earnest money deposit can be larger than your down payment, and you can get that money back at the table. I once had a buyer, one of my agents actually had a buyer, and they were looking to buy a condo, and they were paying cash, and they were doing no contingencies except for the home inspection. And it was an REO, and it was $42,000. I don't know why it was so cheap, but it was $42,000 for a condo. And this guy wanted to pay $37,000. And it wasn't a strong seller's market, but he still wanted to get $5,000 off a $42,000 asking price. So that's over, 10%. So what he did was he put the entire $37,000 up in earnest money. Now he took a giant risk because if he backed out, except for the home inspection, he would have lost that money. But we explained that to him, and he willingly did that. And because he did that, the bank took that $37,000 offer right away without countering, and he got the deal, and he saved over 10%. So if you have a buyer who has cash, even if they don't want to spend it, one of the ways that you can make their offer stronger, we all know, is by putting up a large sum of earnest money. But what some of us don't often realize is that you can put up more earnest money than the actual down payment. And in crazy times, you can put up the whole amount. In theory, you can put up more than the purchase price that someone's going to hold in case that buyer defaults. And that's really going to go a long way in helping them accept that offer. The next one is make your earnest money deposit go hard. And what I mean by that, get your head out of the gutter. What I mean by that is that we all know that earnest money goes into escrow. That's escrow law, and that's how it's written into the contract. But with your broker and or legal's approval, you can now have that earnest money deposit go hard, meaning that the seller gets to use that money right away, and it doesn't get refunded no matter what. This is a really good tool to use, one, to make your offer really, really stand out. And there are other ways to use this. And one of my favorite ways is if you're going FHA, and let's say you know that that property is going to need repair because of the FHA appraisal, not the home inspection. We're talking mandatory repairs. And the seller either is unable or unwilling to make those repairs prior to settlement. If you make that earnest money deposit go hard, that means that the seller has that money prior to closing, can use that money to do whatever they want, hopefully to make those repairs on the property, and that'll get your property to settlement. So making your earnest money go hard is one of my secret sauce ways to make an offer really go strong. And if anybody has questions about that, jump in, because I usually get people that are like, yeah, I love doing that, or that's scary, or they don't understand it. So feel free to jump in.
Do you write that into the agreement of sale?
Yes, you write that into the agreement of sale, and that's why I say contact your broker or contact legal, because whenever we write something into an agreement of sale, whenever we write something into an agreement of sale, we're not allowed, we're not attorneys. So we always have to have it written in, and we have proprietary language in our office that was written up by an attorney once, and that way we can use it over and over again. And I forget exactly the wording of it, but it basically just says that the seller can use the money and that it's not refundable.
And would you put that like in additional terms at the end?
Yeah, I think we put it in, I think it goes into ours right where the earnest money goes, where it says it's being held in escrow.
Okay.
We have it put in there.
Okay.
and like, strike that so that it's not being held in escrow, because that's the whole point. Is it's not subject to escrow laws now. It's not being held in escrow. The seller gets that money. And I'm telling you, like, I have in my opinion, two of my tricks, or I don't want to say tricks because they're not like shady or unethical, but two of my tips, I think most of them are pretty standard, but this one, and I have one other one that when I first started using them, I was like, this is amazing. This one's amazing. And I learned this years ago from an investor that I work with, that she was doing these on commercial deals all the time. And I was like, that's really cool. And we started using them in residential, and they're super effective, especially in a crazy market like this, a crazy seller's market. Has anybody used them? No? Try it.
No.
It works. It
No.
works.
But did you say you hope that they use them for repairs?
Well, yeah, but I'm saying is you have to put it in, if that's what the purpose is, you have to put it in writing. Everything has to be put in writing.
So they'll definitely use it for repairs.
Well, if that's what you
If
put
it's in writing.
Yeah, if it's in writing, that's what you still hope, because that's the thing. Well, here's the thing, and you have to explain all the risks to people,
Mhm.
because let's say you put it in writing, you're representing the buyer, you put in writing that it's a hard deposit and that the seller is going to use it for repairs, but then they don't. Well, now you can go after them, but they already spent your money.
Right.
So, there are other ways. If there's stuff with repairs, there's other ways that maybe you could, and you have to check with your lender, but I'm just going off the cuff, that maybe the buyer could just pay the contractor ahead of time and then get a credited settlement. But then if it doesn't settle, there's all these issues that you have to run past an attorney. That's why I always say you would hope, because people put stuff in writing, and then if they don't follow through, yes, they did wrong. It's like when my kids were little and they went across the street. We live in Center City, one-way streets, and they would just look one way. And I'm like, Asher, you have to look both ways, but it's a one-way street. Well, that doesn't mean the car's not riding the wrong way on the street and going to hit you. That means you can sue them afterwards, but you're dead. And that's the same thing with the earnest money deposit. It's like,
Right.
you know what I mean? They
Right,
can.
right.
So
Janice,
that's why I said that. Any other questions? Because I can't see you guys. I don't know where
Janice,
everybody is. Yeah.
you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
the
I'm trying
point-
to find everybody.
At the point you're proposing your earnest money deposit, at that point, there's no inspections or anything like that. So you're saying that this money is just given to them, and if you go through inspection, the contingency doesn't hold to that?
So you can do it a few ways. You could write it up at the beginning of your offer to make it strong and just make the money go hard, just to make your offer strong.
I get that.
Or you could change it later on and do an addendum to the agreement of sale saying now the money is taken out of escrow and it's going to be hard. It's going to go hard. And
Okay.
use that for repairs.
And the seller would agree to that?
Well, if the seller wants to sell their property,
Yeah, okay. All
so
right.
think about this. If a seller, and this is really only FHA, because this doesn't have to do anything with home inspection. This has to do with FHA appraisal. So let's say you're under contract, you're representing the buyer, it's FHA, and the seller agrees, and it's a regular earnest money deposit, but then the appraisal comes back and says they have to do $3,000 worth of repairs and they don't have the money.
Mhm.
And you have $3,000 in earnest money, or you have $4,000, or you have $2,000. Well, now you can add another $1,000 to it and say that money's going hard and the seller has to use it for repairs. Make sense?
It
And
does.
that's what it said, contact your broker, contact your lawyer up, because I'm not an attorney.
So you're always saying to use it on FHA deals?
No, you can use it on anything. Because let's say you're representing a buyer and you're competing against another buyer or several for a
Yeah,
property. It doesn't have to be FHA. And you say your earnest money is going hard. The seller knows, even if you get out under the mortgage clause, even if you get out under one of your contingencies, they're keeping the earnest money.
That's what I'm saying. They keep the earnest money no matter what.
No matter what. And the buyer's definitely taking a risk. But think about this. Buyers get into bidding wars and start bidding up over asking price. That's real money, right? And they're bidding against themselves. They're bidding blind because they don't know what the other offers are. So if they're willing to go $5,000, $10,000 over asking, maybe they're willing to put $2,500 hard. And they're only standing to lose that if their offer gets accepted and they back out of the deal, whether it's through a contingency or breach. And so it's the same thing that I look at with sellers when they're looking to reduce their price in a buyer's market or in, an overpriced property. Sellers are so quick to say, I'll reduce the price, because it doesn't feel real. They're just reducing a number on a computer screen. But if you ask them to write a check for $3,000 to stage their property or to get a room painted, they're a lot less apt oftentimes to do that, because they're like, I don't want to spend money. But they'll end up spending less money if they fix up the property or stage it than they would if they reduce the price by $10,000. It's the same thing with a buyer. If they put this earnest money deposit hard and they stand the chance of losing it, yeah, they might lose the money and they have to know that and agree to that. But the alternative is outbid themselves, keep bidding up and spending more money. So it's definitely a tool that people can use, and it's not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart, but it is definitely a tool that I found that has gotten my buyers their property sometimes. All right, so the next one is price, and obviously that should have just been
Janis,
first. Yeah.
Can you check the chat? I sent you some messages.
Oh, yeah. Hold on.
Thanks.
Oh, so wait a second. Okay, so this is like a really weird Zoom today. I don't see anyone waiting to get in. I don't see anyone waiting to get in the room. I'm sorry. You can, I can't. I'm just going to move on. And then if you need me, tell me, because it's like, I can't see everything on the screen today. It's like a really weird setup. I don't know what Zoom is doing. So we talked about price, and price should have been first because price is what everybody thinks of. And, you could just keep bidding up. But if you use some of these other tools, then you might not have to go up on price. Settlement date. So we always think that the seller just wants to close as soon as possible, but the reality is we don't know. So actually, let's back up. Let's start with the first thing that I always do when I write up an offer is I make a call to the listing agent. Now, for those of you, when you're the listing agent, we all know that our fiduciary is to the seller and that we should never disclose anything about the seller. Of course not. We can disclose about the property, but we can't disclose anything that's confidential. But the reality is you can get a lot from a conversation when you call the listing agent, such as when they want to close. You can start to feel out where they are position-wise. You can get a good idea of where the seller is and what they want by asking leading questions of the listing agent. And so the first thing that I always do before I write up an offer is I call the listing agent and I say, yeah, my buyer's really interested, but I have a question. And I ask a question that hopefully will lead to me finding out a little bit more information and developing a rapport with that listing agent. Because whether we want to admit it or not, the reality is we all want to deal with agents that we're comfortable dealing with because we know the transaction is going to go smoothly for our client. So if you make that phone call and you have a conversation, not a text, not an email, and you ask questions, you might find out a lot of information from that listing agent that will help your buyer make their offer stronger. And one of those things is settlement date. If you have a conversation and you realize that the seller needs to stay for a certain amount of time because their new house isn't ready, or they have to get out right away because their house has been ready, that can help you if your buyer is flexible on settlement date. So that's definitely, it seems like a no-brainer, easy one, but make sure you have that conversation with the listing agent and find out. Here's my next favorite secret sauce. Offer to use the seller's lender or title company. And this one's friggin' brilliant because how many times have you gotten offers when you're a listing agent, you've gotten offers and the buyer is using some crazy title company that you never heard of or that you hate, or a lender that you know can't close, and you're afraid to take the offer because you're afraid that it's not going to make it to settlement or that it's going to be a nightmare even post-closing. Well, if your buyer's on board with it and they offer to let the seller choose the title company and or the lender, that right there can make your offer stand out above and beyond anyone else's. Has anyone ever used this? I have. No one else has used it?
Title company, yes. Lender, no.
It's pretty scary to use somebody else's lender, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you have to go through the pre-qualification before.
You do, but imagine if you're in a bidding war and you offer, obviously you have to check with the lender and make sure that they're compatible and that they're going to pre-qualify your buyer. But using their title company and or using their lender has won me deals numerous times. And I can't stress enough how strong of a tactic that is. Has anyone else ever used it? Where are all my people? No?
No.
Okay. Anyone want to use it now? Anyone scared of it?
How do you, I mean, once you get into, like, once you go in and you're already into the deal, how do you switch lenders at that point?
Well, this is at the offer. This is at the offer position. So if you're in multiple, go ahead.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, if I'm already at the point where I'm making an offer, then I
Mhm.
already have a lender and I've already done the pre-qual and I've already gotten the letter. And
Yeah.
so
This
then how do I
lender-
say, like, okay, now I'm going to switch to your lender?
Oh, here's what I do. I put in the offer and I call the agent and I say, here's our offer. I know we're in a bidding war. I get it. If there's anything we can do, in fact, my buyer, if your seller is comfortable with it, is willing to use their title company and even use their lender, I can call them right now and get them pre-qualified. How fast we move? Don't you move like this? We all move like this when we want deals. It's not that hard to get a pre-qual letter.
No, it's not. I just, then you go back and you tell your other lender, like,
Let me tell you something. When it comes to forget about yourself and myself.
well, I just feel like I just didn't want to hurt my other lender because I might need him.
No, of course not. Absolutely, of course not. But the reality is we have to remember our fiduciary is our buyer, and we can lean on that and say, I'm really sorry. You say this to lender, I'm really sorry, but this was the way that we got the deal done. And just don't blame me for it because I might use that lender later and I don't want him to know that you got that idea from me. So don't use Janet, right? Okay. That's a small town.
I won't throw you under the bus, I promise.
Right. Don't. Thank you. No, I get what you're saying. But the reality is when we take ourselves out of the equation and fall back on the fact that it's our fiduciary, then we just, that's what it is. Because the reality, we're doing this for our client. And
Right.
if you think about some of these things that I'm suggesting today, the alternative is to spend $10,000 above asking price.
Right.
And like,
It is a good idea. You're right. It is.
yeah. And I know it's like outside the box, but that's why we're taking an hour out of our day today,
Right.
is because we want to have tools in our tool belt that are outside the box.
Yeah.
And are you going to use it every time? Of course not.
Right.
But one of my agents had a listing a couple of months ago, and it was out. We do everything in the city. This was right outside the city, and I just couldn't believe there were 9 offers, and they were almost all of them. They were all at asking or above asking. It was listed at $560. It sold for $6,015. Do you know how stupid that is to spend that kind of money? And they had to waive the appraisal contingency. It was like a 70 LTV because we knew it wasn't going to appraise. Do you know how dumb that is? And the fact of the matter is that this is what's happening. And the buyers are everybody's bidding up. And yeah, it's great for the sellers, but it's not really great if you look at it because the prices are going up so fast and people are spending all this money and it's not real. It's like inflation. I'm no economist, but if you think about using some other things to make your offer stronger, then you might not have to go up $40,000 above asking or $20,000 above asking because that's real money over 30 years, but it's real money. So if you need help talking to the lender, and I'll we'll grab a drink and we'll do a Zoom and I'll talk, I'll give you a pep talk to get through it, because it's about the buyer, and that's what we all have to remember.
Right. No, the ideas are great. No, absolutely. I I love the ideas though.
Thank you.
They are great.
All right, cool. All right, so we'll move on to the next one. Any other questions? All right, so we did that one, lender, and then dates. Obviously, dates are important, and that's another thing. Talk to the listing agent, because it's not just settlement date, but it's all kinds of other dates, and contingency dates are important also. The shortest that you can possibly do. One of the things that I do is I literally text my home inspector when I'm writing up an offer, and I make an appointment, and I tell them I'm penciling it in because I'm writing an appointment. And so I make my home inspection contingency dates as short as possible based on his schedule. And if my buyer has their own inspector, I call that inspector. I'd rather do a little bit of prep work putting the offer together so that I can make it stronger. And that's one of the things I do. I'll go in so much as go through every single date in there, and not just the home inspection, but stuff like how long do they have to order the condo docs? Like every date that I possibly can to make it more advantageous to the seller, I will. And then I have to point them out to the listing agent, because unfortunately, a lot of listing agents only look for certain dates and they're not going to pay attention to all the little ones. But you can do it in the way of a cover letter. So you can put it in in the email. If you send it over via email, you can put all the points, you can pull them out in a summary and pull out the points that are important that they might not look for, and say, oh, we're giving you extra time for this, or we're making it a really short date for that. And by going through and checking every single date and making it as advantageous as possible to the seller, you could be saving your buyer money. So we talked about dates. Okay, so now let's talk about inspection. This is one of my favorites. So let me make this full screen. So back in the olden days, we used to have something called option 2 on the home inspection. This is just a screenshot from the agreement of sale. So we all know about home inspections now, and we can say how many days, the shortest amount of days possible is more advantageous or attractive to the seller. But the buyer is still the one that has the right to terminate. They have a unilateral right to terminate. So we all know how it goes. Buyer presents the home inspection and says, I accept, I reject, or I'm going to negotiate. If they want to negotiate, the seller doesn't have to negotiate with them, but the seller doesn't have the right to terminate. They're still waiting to see what the buyer wants to do. So even in cases when we say property is as is, or we say inspection is for informational purposes only, unless we expressly cross out the right to terminate, unless we take that right away, we waive that right, the buyer still has the right to terminate. And we all know the buyer still they're going to come back and ask for repair sometimes anyway. And the seller can say no, but there's nothing preventing the buyer from asking, and there's nothing from preventing the buyer from terminating. But this right here in the agreement of sale now says the inspections elected above do not apply to the following existing conditions and/or items. So this is something that you can put in there. If, let's say, we know that the HVAC unit is on the fritz, and the buyer says, well, I know the HVAC unit is on the fritz, but I want to get it inspected anyway. Unless you write something in here that says it's not subject to HVAC, the buyer can still terminate if the HVAC comes back defective. So anything you put in here weakens the buyer's ability to terminate based on certain pre-existing conditions. So this can make your buyer's offer stronger, but I want to take it a step further and resuscitate what used to be option 2. And I don't know if anyone remembers option 2, but option 2, instead of putting this in here this way, do not apply to the following conditions, this was a dollar amount. So what it basically said, and we're trying to find the old verbiage so that we can copy it. And if anybody has an old agreement of sale with option 2, please email it to me. But it basically said in more eloquent terms that if the repairs necessary exceed X amount of dollars, and the buyer filled in that dollar amount, then the buyer could terminate. But if they did not exceed that amount, then the buyer had to accept the property. And that was such a great tool to make your buyer's offer stronger because they still had the right to inspect and they still had the right to terminate. But it was basically them putting in writing to the seller and saying, look, I know it needs some work. I'm not here to nitpick because that GFCI outlet it should be GFCI in the bathroom. I'm not going to terminate because of a stupid $20 repair. I'm willing to take this property with $2,500 worth of defects. Anything above that, then I have my right to terminate. Anything below that, I just have to accept the property as is. Does that make sense?
Then
Anybody remember option 2 or have a copy of it somewhere?
Actually, Janice, I don't know what company you're with, but if you put your email address in the chat, I think I might have that.
Oh my God, you're my best friend.
Oh,
Thank you.
everybody says that.
I will. I'll put it right now. I'll put it there in case anyone needs it anyway.
Hey, can you put it in for everybody?
Yeah, I'm putting it in right now.
No, I mean the
Option 2?
the old option 2, because I don't have that anymore, and I started selling when that was a tool
Wasn't that
to
the
use.
best? Do you
It
remember
was
that?
great. It was great.
Begged for it to come back. I don't know why they got rid of it. I was talking to Heather Patron about it, and she wanted it back too. At first she didn't, and then later on she's like, yeah, I want it back. So I've been trying to, every time I see her, I try to remind myself to ask her because she's on the forms committee.
Right.
I don't know why they took it away, but yeah, so if you could somehow, I don't know if you can throw it in the chat now if you have it now, but
No, I'll have to look for it.
okay. All right, well, whenever you find it. If not, if you want to send it to me and I can send me your email and I can get it to you, or put your email in the chat, whatever.
I actually had an offer that was written up by an attorney with a $5,000, anything up to 5,000 they'll take care of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I had that too.
Yeah, that's option 2. And it used to be in our form, which was amazing
Yeah.
because it was
Yeah.
just
No,
option
no,
1 and option 2.
He wrote a whole 2 paragraphs. It's a lot.
Gotcha. Well, I loved it in the form because it was just simple. Option 1 or option 2.
Maybe GPAR could make it available to anybody who wants it. The old document.
If they could find it, okay. Can you simply write a dollar amount on line 407? So let me see line, I don't know why my notifications are on. Line 407. So you know what? I don't know if legally, it seems like it should be, but I don't know if you just put a dollar amount in there, if that would hold up legally, because the way option 2 was written, it was explicit. So I'd rather use option 2 or just contact an attorney and have them draw up language for you. And then you can reuse that. Like if you have an attorney draw up language for you, then you can use it over and over again and basically, add that clause into your contract. But we're going to find that old option 2 and use it. All right, so now we're going to get into the mortgage contingency. And most of us are pretty familiar with the mortgage clause, but I just want to go over it a little bit. And a little bit of my nerdy background is that when I first started out in real estate, back in the 1900s, I didn't know how to do mortgages. They scared me. So I got a job as a loan officer. And I did both for the first 5.5 years of my real estate career. And I really learned a lot about mortgages. And even though stuff has changed, it's still fundamentally the same. And so there's certain things in the mortgage clause that may be super obvious, but I'll go over them real quick about making your buyer's offer stronger. So the first thing is when we waive the mortgage clause, we all know that doesn't mean that they have to pay cash. That means that they lose their deposit money if their mortgage is not approved. It means they're waiving the fact that it's contingent upon financing, but they still can get financing. So if the person, it's not a way of making the earnest money hard because the seller doesn't get to hold on to it right now. It's still being held in escrow, but it waives the right for the buyer to get that money back if their mortgage is denied. And that is not as good as cash, because if their mortgage is declined, then the seller only keeps the earnest money, but they don't sell the property. But if your buyer can't pay cash and they're quite certain that they're going to get approved for a mortgage, waiving the mortgage clause is one of the best things you can do to make their offer stand out over everyone else's. And that most people that I meet tend to think waiving it means it's cash. That's not what it means. So if you can waive it, waive it. If you can't waive it, then you elect it. And obviously, if we elect it, the main things to point out here are the lender, because there are times I've seen listing agents in MLS say we will not accept from this bank because they've had a bad experience and the seller won't accept financing from that bank. So the lender here is going to be important potentially to the seller. It may or may not matter, but the interest rate is going to be important. And this interest rate range, in case anyone needs a refresh on it, all this is saying is that the buyer is pre-qualified or expecting to get a rate of something. But if the rate goes up, because we know rates float and rates can change, if the rate goes up to this number, they're still qualified and they're still going to purchase the property. I've seen rates in here that are now they're so low that it's almost impossible to be too low. But back in the day when rates were 4, I've seen them as low as like 2 to 2 1/8. Well, that means that the buyer can get out no matter what, because we know that they're not going to get a mortgage between 2 and 2 1/8 if the rates are 4. So the rates here have to be comparable to what the real going rate is, and the rate range has to be wide enough for fluctuation. And if you're not sure and you're a listing agent and you get an offer, check with one of your preferred lenders and see if it's realistic. The other thing is going to be the mortgage commitment date, and that also has to be realistic, and it has to be close enough that the seller isn't keeping the property off the market too long without having that mortgage approved. Now, we all know that we can get a loan commitment, we can have everything done, and then the day before settlement, the buyer could lose their job and the mortgage is declined and the buyer gets their money back. So even though we have that commitment date, the thing about a mortgage clause is that's up to practically the last minute. And even though they're really standard, there's not much that makes your offer weaker than a mortgage clause. So if at all possible, waive that mortgage clause. I'm doing that right now with a buyer in order to get their loan. He's doing a VA loan to purchase a multifamily property, and he knows he's getting approved, but the seller didn't want to take a VA loan, so we waived that mortgage clause and he got the property, and he got it for less than asking price. Any questions about mortgage clauses, comments, concerns? Anyone? Okay. We shall move on.
I
What
do have a question. Do you
Oh,
then
sure.
put a smaller deposit down?
If they waive the mortgage clause?
Yeah,
Well, so it's all negotiation. So here's the thing. We're looking at all these moving parts, and that's a really good question, because we're looking at all these moving parts, and it's the sum of all these moving parts. And so it totally depends. It depends on what your buyer is comfortable with. Now, in the case of the VA, they put down $10,000 in earnest, but he's going to get that back because it's zero deposit, but he still put an earnest money deposit down. If he would have waived it but put $0 down or $1, the seller might not have taken it. So we basically have to look and say, when you're representing the buyer, how much can you do and still be comfortable with losing, and offer that to the seller and see if that's enough. And the seller can always come back and say, okay, I'll take your mortgage clause, but I'm going to counter on your earnest money deposit. I want more. So it depends, but that's the key is that it's not just what's the price, what's the settlement date. It's all these moving parts and how they play together. And that's why, when you write up an offer, if you're writing up an offer for a first-time home buyer, they're always like, well, how much is the earnest money deposit? Well, what do you mean, how much is it? It's by negotiation, right? Let's see what the rest of your offer looks like. And if it's strong, we can make your earnest money a little lower. If your offer is lacking somewhere or it's weak somewhere, let's up your earnest money to sort of strengthen it out. Does that make sense?
can you put like the initial deposit as forfeitable and then have another
Absolutely.
deposit that is in escrow?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, you have to remember that these forms that we have, these are our standard forms. They can be changed as long as they're legal. So you have to have legal behind you. But most of the stuff in here isn't law. It's standard form. It's by customer by agreement. Like, for example, who holds the earnest money? It's not law. It's not RELRA that says that the listing broker has to hold earnest money. It's just by agreement. It's standard. It's custom. So that's why it says unless otherwise specified here. So we can take all these moving parts, all these tools, and we can do whatever the heck we want with them, as long as if we're going to make changes to the agreement, we have to have an attorney behind us to check us and make sure it's okay. But yeah, and it's fun because one of the things that I say as a broker and that I say as an instructor is my job is to give you all the tools and put them in your tool belt so that you can whip them out and make stuff happen. And that's what this is. All these are tools that you can put together and use to make a deal happen. Just check with your attorney. I have to say 100,000 times I'm not an attorney. Any other questions? We'll move on. Okay. So we did the mortgage clause, and what's next? This one, uncheck that box and point it out to the seller. So most of the time in almost every deal I've ever done in my entire career, that box is checked. And that's fine. We consider that custom. We consider that standard. And I've never had a seller balk and say, I'm not accepting the offer with that box checked. But by unchecking that box and saying that the seller is not limited to retaining sums paid by buyer as liquidated damages, now you're giving the seller a little bit more power or recourse to go back if the buyer defaults. So that's another fun thing that you can do. Just make sure that your buyer is aware of what's going on. You explain it to them and point it out to the seller. When you're sending over your offer, put it in the cover letter so that it's not for nothing, so that they understand that you're doing that. Oh, that was all I had. So, and then these are just ways to get in touch with me. So does anyone have any questions or comments about any of this stuff going on? We're right at the 45-minute mark. So we'll open up for Q&A if anybody has any, or if anybody has any suggestions of stuff that I didn't bring up today. Okay. So a couple other quick little tips, and then if there are no, and I'll check in the chat if there are any questions. No more questions. So, what else was I going to say about right? Oh, one other thing that I can just say about your offer is that I always suggest to my buyers that if they're in love with a house or they decide on the house, like I always say, I'm never going to push you to put in an offer on a house that you don't want. But once you decide you want the offer, we're putting in the offer now. You can't sleep on it, because the house you're thinking about today that you saw yesterday is the house, or that you're thinking about till tomorrow is the house that someone saw yesterday and thought about until today. And they're going to beat you to it. So get your offer in quickly, get it clean. Your reputation with other agents in this town is more important than your reputation with clients, because you're going to be dealing with these agents over and over again. And we all know there are certain agents that we never want to deal with because they're either sloppy or shady or whatever. Don't be that agent. If you're the agent that people know your deal's closed, you're honest, you're forthright, you're clean, your offers are clean, you're going to have a better chance, because people are going to want to do business with you, and that's going to help their seller. So make sure you're that person. Make sure your offers are clean. Make sure that you're not sending over documents that the seller doesn't need. For example, the consumer notice between you and your buyer. And I might sound a little tough, but this is, if someone submits an offer on my listing and it's sloppy, and they've sent me documents that I don't need, or they've missed documents that I do need, I automatically think that that offer is bad and that it might not close. It weakens that offer because it makes me nervous for my client. So when you're representing a buyer, your buyer's offer might not be the strongest. It might not beat out another buyer's offer, but if your package, if your offer is clean and strong and you have a good reputation, that might put your buyer ahead of everyone else. And we all know that. We've all dealt with that agent who doesn't have their act together, and they're a nightmare. And no matter how great their offer is, we know it's never going to close. So we instruct our seller to take the second best offer because we'd rather have 50% of something than 100% of nothing, right? All right, so any other questions? All right, well, here's how to reach me if you need me. I'm Settled Down Philadelphia, so I'm all over social media. I sound so fancy, not fancy. And there's my email. Well, that's one of my emails. I put my other email in the chat. And that's it. If there are no questions, I hope everybody learned a little bit today.
Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. And please, if you send that,
I'm
if
looking
you
for
find
it.
that option too, and then who else wanted it? If you send me an email, I'll forward it. If anybody wants it, send me an email and I'll forward it when I get it. Okay. Matt, did you have any announcements if you're still there?
I'm going to make the announcement. So Matt's,
Right.
so Matt is in our background, but he isn't free to speak at the moment because he's taking care of some other business.
Okay.
Janice, thank you so very much for giving us presentation today. It was great. For any of you that are here that may have missed her presentation last week, you will be able to find that on the GPAR YouTube channel. Some upcoming things that GPAR has going on next Friday, December the 18th, general membership, of course, virtual, excuse me. And we have some great content and some great speakers. So please be on the lookout for those emails and join us next Friday morning, 8:30 a.m. until noon. We'll have Kevin doing his state of the real estate market, which is always a great sell. And we'll be moderating a panel of industry insiders. And we will have the president of the National Association with us as well. And one of the other things I just wanted to highlight real quick is the Realtors Feed Philly 5K. If you're not participating, we basically beg you to do so. With the climate that's been going on the last several months, they are in much need of funds. As many of you may know, Philabundance was basically robbed of a lot of their monies. And we want to assure you that no donor information was compromised in any way. It basically was a straight up theft. So they can use all the help that they can get. And any of our members who can participate in that, we would be very grateful to have you in. But other than that, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope to see you again in the future with some of our future presentations. And Janis, thank you so much for the time that you've dedicated to this class and other classes. And everybody have a great day and a great week.
Hi, Donna.